everyone. Welcome to the Acushnet School Committee meeting on Tuesday, October 27th. Per Governor Baker's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, the public will not be allowed to physically access this school committee meeting. Members of the public can access the meeting via live stream. There is a YouTube link that's included in the agenda posted at the town's website as well as our own website. In addition, the events will be rebroadcast on the local cable access channel. The school committee reserves the right to implement additional remote participation procedures and will notify the public of these procedures as soon as they're practicable. So, calling this meeting to order. Again, today is Tuesday, October 27th. This meeting is being video and audio recorded for cable broadcast. And we are going to begin with the approval of minutes, payroll, and warrants. Actually, there's nothing on there. Sorry about that. Moving on to old business, we're going to move right in to face coverings. EBCFA policy. This is a policy that's been under discussion by the policy subcommittee committee. We've yet to come to agreement as a full committee on this policy, and so it's been under ongoing discussion. Tonight, we're going to hopefully finalize our discussion on this vote and come to a vote on this policy. So before we discuss, Dr. Bailey, I want to allow you an opportunity to start us off with our discussion. Go ahead.
Sure. I'll just keep my comments brief. I just want to say that we've been working collaboratively with the town officials, including the Board of Health and the fire chief, and we've done extensive testing, and our families have been extremely cooperative. And what that data has now showed is that the virus is not spreading within the schools. Any issues that we've had, it's definitely coming from the outside as we've done the contact tracing. So the idea now that we know that is to scale back a little bit, and the town eventually will run out of money for the testing, so we've got to do it when we really need it. But we've been able to prove that our protocols are sound. What we have in place seems to really be working well. And the students are doing a great job. Our staff is doing great. So unless anybody has any questions, we're in a good place right now with the staff and the students in terms of our hybrid model.
Thanks, Dr. Bailey. So what I thought we would do is really just allow each member to have an opportunity to share any last thoughts, insights, comments about the policy, any final questions you might have. Mr. Sumner, I know you were not able to be with us at a recent meeting where we had gotten some guidance from legal as well as the Massachusetts Association of School Committees. That meeting was recorded. Just wanted to see if you had an opportunity to view that video, and then if you had any questions or if you wanted to comment at all.
No, I did, and thank you, Paul, for sending that over. I think it was still a little unclear at the end of it with a decision based on Andy and Jim. I think I was looking for more of a direct response.
Can you hear
No.
Mr. Sumner? We can't hear you, Mr. Sumner. I don't know if you can read my lips. Can you hear me?
You hear me?
Now we can. Yeah. So we missed what you had just said.
Oh, sorry. I wish they were a little more clear on, with reviewing the language and saying, yes, you can, or no, you can't do it, versus, well, it's a gray area and it's really up to the committee and it's up to administration. I think when we left that last meeting in the gym, I think we were looking for that definitive answer, whether yes, you can or no, you can't.
I mean, I think we can do within reason. We can do it. I think the problem is that there's potential risks of doing it, right? And those risks are gray because it seems to me that it involves what we heard from the ATA was a potential, grievance, right? And so there's gray area there in terms of whether that would be successful or not. So, I mean, at least that's how I walked away from. I wasn't on the whole call. I had to drop early, but I think from the previous discussions we've had, that part I think is, or at least that's what I took away from it, right? Like, we can do this, sure, but you have to do it under the advisement as there's a potential risk there.
Yeah.
And I just
Dr.
want to
Bailey.
be transparent. The ATA president did notify me that if anything was changed, that we have to request a bargain with the union. And if not, she would file an unfair labor practice.
Sorry. If I could just make one comment, Sarah, and then I'll go to you. My recollection of Andy's recommendation in that meeting was, well, first he said it was a gray area and it is a matter of interpretation, how the changes proposed would be interpreted. It sounds like we know the direction it will go into. What I took from that meeting is that we were advised from legal counsel that we should keep the policy as written, which is general and broad, so that we can continue to determine as a district how we interpret that policy, how the procedures roll out. Right now, we have a certain procedure in place. As Dr. Bailey pointed out, we don't have reason to believe at this time that it's problematic. But if we find that out, the way that the policy is currently written in its broad design allows us to shift, allows us to decide we're going to eat in the lunchroom, take how many mass breaks, pull back, push forward. So that's what I took from that conversation, is that we were advised to keep it broad so that we can flex and move if necessary. And so that's what I took. Ms. Gomes?
So as you took away some items, I specifically asked Andy, out of the items that I had suggested, he did mention that the first item regarding the number of mass breaks could be a problem. But the other bullet points he didn't see would be a big deal, that they weren't, the regulation wasn't so far out there that it would ruin an MOA that we currently have with the teachers. I also want to say that the way, again, with this policy, we're saying that as it is written. However, again, that was a template from MASC, not voted on by our school committee, and again, just used as a template for us to arrange the way we saw fit as a school committee. So I just want to make that completely clear to everyone and everyone that's watching.
I think the question, Sarah, that I have is, and I don't know if I have your most current version, but the last version that I think that was circulated to the committee, the way that I read this is while eating or drinking in the classroom and other designated areas with individual classes. So to me, that does not make it clear that we are saying they're going to eat and drink in the classroom, right? I think that the way that that's worded is still up for the implementation to drive where they're going to eat and drink. And so I don't know, I had to drop off the call if that was Andy's takeaway, is that, hey, it's broad enough that it doesn't really specify one way or the other, because I don't think that the way this is currently written is really getting at what I think your intention is here, which is to make it very clear that they're eating and drinking in the classroom, unless I'm wrong.
No, so he didn't go into detail with that one. Again, the only one that he specifically discussed that might be an issue was during mass breaks in the classrooms at least every hour, which could go against the teachers' work habits or something along those lines. Other than that, the other ones, were not an issue. But again, when I wrote while eating or drinking in the classroom and other designated areas with individual classes, basically that explains that there are not more than one class at a time. And I'm not talking about a grade, I'm talking about an individual class. So for example, Miss Mary's class cannot have lunch with Miss Jane's class. So with that being said, If there's, one teacher that wants to go outside and another one that wants to stay in the classroom, that's all well and good. That's fine. It was mixing the classes that I had concerns about. So again, I thought writing it that way suggested, again, with individual classes, not grades, classes. And that's why I wrote it in that way. And again, with the,
I'll just, so I read that and it's not clear to, again, and sure, the policy could be reworded to get at the intention. My only point with this is the way that this is currently laid out to me, and I don't know if I'm the only one who feels that way, it does not make it clear as far as what I interpret from it, that they're going to be eaten in the classroom. To me, this still leaves room for interpretation that could be decided, okay, well, we're not going to eat and drink in the classroom.
right. And I didn't want it to be, if they want to eat outside, they can absolutely do that. I did not want to stop that from happening. And if there are other areas that are safe, I needed to make it broad as well. But at the point, my concern is mixing the classes. That is my main concern. And I thought writing it that way would prevent that. But if there's better wording that someone else can recommend, that's fine.
Fair enough. I just so we're clear as we have the discussion, I think it's important to make sure that we have the discussion around what the intent is, and if we got to a place where the wording needs to change for the final policy, fine. That's just my interpretation of how I read it. But
yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a good point, Ron, about how it's currently written, because it still is a matter of interpretation of, here's a policy and here is how our administration, along with teachers and other stakeholders in the district, will determine collectively how they implement that policy based on a number of factors. And so, Glenn, I think my personal preference is you keep a policy, as we've been advised by legal counsel, broad and general, so that we can flex and move as we need to. I hear safety concerns from this committee, and we can talk safety concerns. And I think if we want to talk safety concerns, we should do that. And we should do that outside of a school committee meeting. And we should do it in close coordinations with other stakeholders in the district, like teachers, administrators, so we can have a safety discussion and determine if what we're doing is working, even though right now we don't have reason to believe that, but things can change at any time. We can have that discussion, but in a discussion about policy, which is really, as a school committee, what we're trying to do here, it just doesn't align. So that's what I'm starting to, as we've gone along in this conversation, I'm starting to realize that really this is about implementation, and it's about what we all believe to be the safest approach to be in our schools. And again, we can determine that together. And we, as a school committee member, we can advise, we can suggest, we can propose, but again, it has to be done outside of this meeting and in close coordination with the school district and the stakeholders that are really the ones responsible for executing the procedures of the policy.
But Jen, aren't we supposed to be creating the policy first for the operations to follow whatever the policy states? We're doing this backwards here. What should have happened was the policy subcommittee should have gotten together. Ron and I should have discussed, how our feelings were. And if we didn't come to an agreement, brought it to our school committee, then we should have discussed it. And then, Paula and her team would then implement what our policy states. That's how it should have been. And then in addition to that, an MOA should have been created based on our policy with the teachers union. And I believe you and Craig would have been involved in that also, with you being in the negotiation subcommittee. So again, there would have been communication from school committee's thoughts and the process would have all been involved in this. However, I realized that with COVID, that everything was turned upside down and things had to be done right away and so on and so forth. I completely understand that. And that's why we're in this position right now, is where we're sort of backtracking of, hey, wait a second, there are some school committee members that have different feelings on these operational tasks. And now we're trying to sort of adjust the policy that was, given to us from MASC, which is a very general and can be changed draft to how some of us feel, at least how I feel.
Sarah, I
So
think
again,
that's
Jen, I understand that completely of what you're saying is that, we were all supposed to be talking about this and being, into these meetings over the summer, right? We should have been involved so that we could advise and give our thoughts throughout this entire process, but that didn't happen. So for us to vote on a broad policy right now, then are you suggesting that we start meetings right after we agree to this policy and vote on it and then change it later? Because we can change policies whenever we want.
No,
So is that
I
what you're
don't see it.
recommending?
I don't see a revision to this policy as being necessary. I don't think with the way that the policy is currently written, I think that it allows us the space to make, for the administration to make decisions on procedures, change course, whatever, based on our needs. And the policy as written supports that. And also the policy as written currently, as MASC has outlined it, aligns with the MOA that's already agreed upon. It's
Right.
the protocols that are in place by Dr. Bailey and her team that, that that seems somewhat harmonious by most stakeholders. I mean, so why do anything that would cause unnecessary conflict in our district when there's, from a policy perspective, there's no need to. And
I just feel differently. I feel like there is a problem. I feel that we can do better for our kids. I think that, eating in our classrooms is safer than mixing classes. I just think that's safer. And I think over the long term, when we're thinking about the next year and even possibly into the following year, mixing cohorts and mixing classes is just a nightmare when it comes to one of our kids having COVID and the tracing of it. I did try to call Joe Correa. He hasn't returned my call yet because I know I needed, he wanted to speak to me regarding this because I did have a question of, basically my question was, what's easier to trace? Sitting in a large room with multiple classes or sitting in one room with 12 kids, what's easier to trace? So again, these are my feelings. And again, if I was asked this in the very beginning of the process, I would have let everybody know. But again, when we were told, what the plan was, kids were eating in the classrooms. There were going to be breaks, we were told, and I was fine with all of that. That's my.
Yep.
So-
Okay. I want to allow others some time to speak. John, if you want to weigh in.
Yeah, sure. I think I hear the concerns of both sides, and from my gathering from the meeting with the attorney and everything was really that, the fear is that you've got to reopen an MOA that nobody wants to reopen, right? Is that so? And that's kind of a driving factor here on one end of it, and then I guess concerns about safety, which I share all similar concerns with Sarah. But if I were to prioritize it, I would think in terms of like, really it's those, or let me say it differently. What I'm hearing is it's two separate things. There's policy and then there's what we're actually doing in the school. So what I'm hearing you say, Jen, and possibly Ron too, I'm not sure, but specifically Jen is saying, well, let's give a broad policy and then work on changing what we're doing in the schools. Like these are two separate things. Is that right?
So I'll comment on that. I think we do need to be conscious, and Jen, I certainly want your thoughts as well, of policy versus implementation here. And, I think that the processes that were put in place to support this reopening plan, I don't think that Dr. Bailey made those in isolation, right? I think that she did engage a lot of the stakeholders here, and the plan might not be perfect, but I don't know that there is a perfect plan in our current environment. And so for me, I think there is a conversation to be had about whether we think eating in the classroom may be safer than eating in the cafeteria. And by the way, I am not a doctor and I'm not going to suggest that I know that it's dramatically safer to do it or not. Okay. I think there are pros and cons to both. And, we can have that conversation. But to me, I think that for us to come in as a committee and make that call to decide that we think it's safer to eat in the cafeteria, and therefore we're going to unilaterally make a change to the policy to drive that implementation without engaging those same very stakeholders, right? All of the stakeholders that need to support the process is risky. And I think it's risky because for a number of reasons. One is it threatens to undermine the credibility and the leadership of Dr. Bailey. I think it threatens to damage the relationships and the credibility that we may have built up with some of those stakeholders, right? That we need to partner with to make this happen. And we already heard from the ATA that they were not going to potentially support the change. And I think in this current environment, that do we want to have a contentious relationship right off the bat, or do we want to work together to try to create partnerships in good faith that allow us to be able to keep our kids in school and to work together and to be able to adapt if in fact we need to make changes. And I think it's also potentially a disruption for the kids. And I think the way that we should go about having this conversation is by engaging those same very stakeholders that we need to support this to make it work. And, Sarah said something, which is, hey, this is backwards. We should have had these conversations before. And I think maybe that's true. Or I also think there's a debate about, what is policy and what's implementation and how far in the weeds we should be. But I think it would be backwards now at this point to use a face mask policy to undo the way that we're doing this, because it could potentially be disruptive. And I don't know that it's fair for this committee to make that decision unilaterally at this point in the game. So I'm done.
Ron, I agree with all that, but I would say that I've been fairly vocal and at the same time fairly restrained in terms of my concerns for safety concerns in regards to kind of what's happening in the school. I've been saying it over and over. It seems like it's really not getting heard too well. And if I were to prioritize things, I mean, I think the biggest concern for me is like the breaks, the mass breaks, the snack breaks, whatever they're doing. I guess less lunch, because you could, sure, maybe you could argue that, that there's issues with lunch, whatever. I still say that it's better to do in the classroom. Fine. My biggest problem is with the mass breaks. You saw it on the inclement weather sheet that we got. I mean, you're mixing grades now. You've got first grade and second grade and fourth grade. There's no assigned seating. It's just like, whatever seats are available, they're coming in. And it's a logistical nightmare as well. I mean, just last week they had, an inclement weather day, and it was a total, I don't know what to call it, but you've got basically you've got testing that was occurring outdoors and I don't know if everybody knew this, but they moved the testing indoors, took up the cafeteria in AES doing testing. So in other words, you've got all these people that are potentially COVID positive going and doing testing in the cafeteria while there's kids in the school. And then that inherently is taking up space where half the school is supposed to take a mass break because they can't go outside. So then you've got, people, waiting outside the gym, trying to get in there. Kids hadn't had a mass break for over 2 hours or so. It's just a logistical nightmare to try to manage that. Dr. Bailey even mentioned, seeing people in the hallway taking a mass break by a door. I mean, that's because they couldn't get in the cafeteria because they were doing testing. Now, the idea of doing testing in a school with kids there, that's a totally separate, I guess, safety concern than the mass break concern. But I mean, there's nothing safe about that.
So I have safety concerns, just like all of us. I'm a parent. I have 2 kids in the school, and again, to me, these are all conversations we should be having about what's the right approach to this. None of it, to me, necessarily needs to be driven by what we put in this face mask policy for all the same reasons. What if we have to change what we're doing? What if we have to pivot? And why are we going to box ourselves into a face mask policy?
I agree.
Doesn't make
I
sense.
think everything we're talking about here is not an issue of policy, and we're here to vote on a policy. These are matters of procedure. They should be discussed. We should be talking about them. Um, and I hear all your concerns, John and Sarah. I will say I'm also hearing really positive things about how we're handling things in the district. Feedback from the Board of Health that we shouldn't change anything right now. As of right now, it's quote unquote working. We've been doing extensive tracing in the school, and we've been able to determine that none of the cases at this point have been caused from internal school transmission. That's been determined through the tracing that's been done. So again, I don't have, again, I agree. Just like Ron, I'm not a doctor. I don't know what's safe, what's not. But I don't have evidence to believe at this point in time that what we're doing isn't working. It may have flaws. It may not be perfect. And I'm sure there's certainly always room for improvement. But again, I just do not see this as an issue of a policy. And that's what we're here to do, is to vote on policy language.
Yeah, and I think to my point, which I didn't get to it, but I think we're getting to a place where we're kind of driving policy in that way because it seems like the safety concerns aren't being heard or adapted to.
Can you be specific, Mr. Teves, about that?
Well, I think I mean the inclement weather day from last week, I mean, couldn't have been a better example that I just described. I mean, you know, and by the way, it's a totally separate issue. I mean, we as a committee could also say, I mean, do we really want to have testing inside of our schools while
I agree with you on that. And I actually went over to the school and it had already been in place when it was happening. I think that was
But how does that?
Excuse me, let me finish, please. It was a decision that somebody made and we learned from it. It happened one time and we learned from it. I talked to the chief. The chief has actually purchased a trailer for inclement weather and for winter months. So if there has to be testing or vaccines or whatever, we don't want it done in our school because we utilize the cafeteria. So I agree with you that that was something we learned from. And the principals are also available tonight, should you have any specific questions. But there's no playbook, as I've said before. We are learning as we go along. And the great news here is our kids are safe in our buildings right now, according to the data that we've gotten from the Board of Health, that there's not a spread in the schools, which is great.
And how do you feel about like the mass break schedule that we got, for example, from AES, where you've got, you know, first, second, third, fourth grade classes all mixing together for those?
I mean, I have the principal
Times a
here, and
day.
he can certainly speak to that directly because you've, so I would ask Mr. Oliver if Mr. Johnson's available. I do know that in between the snack breaks, they are disinfecting and cleaning. And it was also my understanding that they were assigned seats for these things, but let's hear directly from the principal. And also, before, I know he's getting on right now, I just also want us to consider things. I know the principals sent some information to the committee members, and they did put in some considerations that if we have adult absences, for instance, how would we possibly cover lunches, like that type of thing. I just want us to be aware of, because whatever's put into a policy, we would have to follow it. So I just need everyone to understand that, you know, it's a little easier to supervise in a larger room than it is several classrooms throughout the day, as well as kids not getting their services because the adults are going class to cover. But Mr. Johnson, if you could unmute.
Hello.
I know that Mr. Teves had some questions about the mask breaks. Is that correct?
That's
Sure.
correct. So Mr. Johnson, did you hear? Were you listening in, or do you need me to repeat?
I heard the part about the inclement weather mask breaks and your concern about that.
Right. So the concern is, so thinking, I guess, to me, like the lunch thing and getting multiple classes together is one thing. That's one level of concern. A higher level of concern for me would be the on the inclement weather days, we've got the snack breaks twice a day, I believe. And then you've got actually multiple, not only multiple classes, but multiple grades. So it's actually not the same people that would be at lunch. It's totally different people. And that's happening twice a day. And from what I understand, you can't do assigned seats on that one, right? Like they're not sitting in the same seats they would be sitting in for lunch, for example. It's just not possible. So
Right.
can you talk to him about that?
Sure. There are a few factors that go into scheduling that. So when we look at basically the 9 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock in the morning and the 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock time in the afternoon, we look to provide two different breaks for our students. One, we traditionally have every single year that there's a recess break that every classroom has. So that's one of those. The second one is this year we've implemented another mask break that's around 15 minutes. So what you should have on a teacher's schedule is in the morning, a recess break, and in the afternoon, a mask break, or vice versa. And that accounts for the two breaks. On nice weather days, it's perfect. We're outside, no issue. Now, when we do it on the inclement weather days, because the specials are running, we call it running vertically rather than horizontally. So in previous years, we would have specials all of a grade level done at the same time. At 9:30, all of second grade goes to their special and they have it. With the schedule we have in place this year, that's not possible. So we have a kindergarten, first, second, third, and fourth grade all having specials at the same time. That now provides a constraint on allowing an entire grade level to go into one of those areas at the same time. That's where you get the mixing of grades. Now, each of the teachers do have a section that they've identified and that they go to on a regular basis on those inclement weather days. So I have seen teachers go, teacher A goes to this quadrant of the gym when it's inclement weather day, and they do that each time. They have their own seating charts. Something that we could do is put those, formalize those a little bit more, but they are sitting in those areas. But those are the constraints that go into those inclement weather days.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Do you have, you feel as though if they were allowed to have that mass break in the room, would that increase the time on learning?
If they were to have the mask break in the room?
Yeah,
Well,
so would that increase the time on learning so you wouldn't have to do transitions?
I would say that the transition to a different location does take up time.
How much time?
I mean, it varies from, it takes longer to transition a pre-K or a kindergarten, class than it does a fourth grade class. So, it's definitely less than 5 minutes. It could be, 2 minutes, 3 minutes.
Mr. Johnson, hi.
Hi.
Question for you regarding the breaks. And again, we already talked about the mass breaks being in different locations. But do you feel as an educator that it would be easier to just have the children take the masks off in the classroom for, 2 to 5 minutes while you're teaching or taking the sips of water there than having them move around the school and then having, I know, for example, there's sometimes when maybe a teacher is running a little bit behind where things could like overlap. You would avoid all of that logistical problems with having it in the classroom, these mass breaks. Do you agree with that?
Well, I agree that we would not have to have all of the different transitions and moving kids around by not having to go to a different location. Yes.
And also tracking there would be no tracking. You wouldn't need to track anything, correct? So if some child did have COVID, you would not have to find out what quadrant they were in the rooms, or if they were outside or inside, or whatever the teacher decided. Is that correct?
I'm pretty confident that we have a good idea of where the kids sit each day in those locations.
So it would not be an issue.
I don't believe so. I'm very confident in knowing where we have our kids each day.
Okay. So I do have another question if nobody else has another question. So Mr. Johnson, as a school committee, we're trying to make things as safe and as efficient as possible from the level that we're at, which is not much, because we're just in control with policy at this time. So my thinking, and of course it's been known to everyone, that I really think that it is safer for our children to take breaks and take off their masks and eat in one location. Now, it's been decided by the team, which you were on, correct?
Yeah, I'm on the leadership team.
Yep, you're on the leadership team.
Yeah.
Now, was the reason for deciding this, was it a logistical problem with teachers? Is that why the decision was made to mix classes and mix cohorts? Or was it just a general, this is a good idea and this is what we're going with?
The leadership team felt that sitting at 8 feet of separation in the cafeteria and the gym was the safest way that we could keep our students safe during lunch.
Regardless of multiple kids being in a large room and regardless of who sits where, is that correct?
We felt that going from 6 foot spacing to 8 foot spacing was appropriate to keep our students at further spacing to keep them safe.
Okay.
And just while we're sharing perspective, I know that your leadership team feels that way. I'd love to just get a sense in your building, Mr. Johnson, of the teachers' feelings about removal of masks in the classroom for eating and drinking. Have you gotten any feedback on that?
In the last several weeks, the systems that we have in place have been working very well, and I have not had individuals coming to me saying that there was a concern about how the system was playing out in order to keep our students safe.
Thanks. And then are you also, I'm wondering if you're getting any feedback from parents calling you about concerns about what's happening in their building?
I have spoken with a lot of parents in the last several weeks, a tremendous number of parents, and I have received an overwhelming number of parents supporting what we are doing in school to keep all of our students and families safe.
Thank you.
Johnson, is there an issue with, I didn't get notes, I wasn't sure on the lunch, the lunch duty schedule?
Okay.
I think we got that in Drive, and I was just curious on that one. Are there issues with coverage if that were to change?
Could you clarify your question a little bit more? I'm not sure what you mean by
Oh,
coverage.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. So if the kids were to eat in the classroom instead of congregating in the cafeteria and gym, would there be a coverage issue? Like I think we got it mapped out by FMS. It was pretty clear, like they kind of showed they could do it. On the AES, I wasn't sure.
Sure. So I did put a document together in which I outlined we can utilize 9 paras to cover 32 lunches in the classrooms. However, that comes with a lot of constraints, some of which include the paras would be eating lunch at 10:25 in the morning. They would not have another break in the day until their workday ends. The paras would be increasing their duties from 2 to 4. We would not be able to provide paras to provide academic or special education supports for almost 3 hours in the middle of the day. The custodians would not be available for over 2 hours to do their normal custodial duties around the building, as they would have to spend that time going to 32 different classrooms every 5 minutes to clean those.
I have a question on that. Why would they have to clean each of the classrooms after each lunch? I don't understand that.
Well, all of our students have spills and make their own messes during the lunch periods. There's a lot of cleaning that goes into all of that. And it's very difficult to have elementary school students take the responsibility of being able to completely sanitize their space and clean their space effectively afterwards. The teacher is still going to have to go the second half of the day. And I know that, they would want to have a clean classroom that doesn't have, cereal on the floor or food on the floor or spilled milk and such. So
They
yeah.
they clean their own desks all the time, from what I understand, is they wipe it down all the time. I think if the concern with the disinfecting would come if there was a different child sitting there. So obviously that's a concern at lunch when you've got, what, 3-4 different lunch shifts. You've got to disinfect before the next kid sits down, but that's not the case when they're sitting in the classroom. No other child sitting at that desk that day.
That's right. It's the spills, I mean, they spill milk. They've got cereal and it's in a container. They spill it. There's garbage and such.
And it's my understanding that it wouldn't be like the paras are already really the ones that are cleaning most of the desks at lunch anyway, right?
Well, we have a custodian in each of the locations that do a lot of the work. We do have paras that have stepped up and are helping. I help from time to time. It's just a team effort to get it done, but the custodians have been very good at being able to clean the cafeteria.
My last question is was there any, I'm sorry, Jen, you had your hand raised. I didn't mean.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought, John.
Because I was just wondering on that lunch schedule, did something change on that recently? Because I was badgering my wife because it was taking so long, and I had seen the lunch duties and it was different than this. So did something change within the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 days?
Nothing's changed in the last 4 or 5 days. I have been working with the paras over the last several weeks about the number of duties that they are doing in the building. As they're concerned about the number of duties and how many kids they're exposed to. So one of the things that I worked with them on was reducing the number of lunch duties that they had. They each had 3 or 4 at one point, and I was able to reduce that down to 2 for them that limited their exposure. But
okay, because
yeah.
when I had seen it last, there were 6 people on each lunch duty with 2 on call, and now it's down to 4.
Right. So there are those other people that we had utilized or that I had put on there as on call and such. It's difficult to utilize them on a full-time basis. So my 2 specialists, for example, music and phys ed, they're also going to be teaching kindergarten and first grade during part of that lunch block, which means that I cannot necessarily schedule them on a regular basis for all of those lunch periods. That reduces my number of people. The other one is the guidance counselors. One of them is always going to be teaching a class, and the other one, that's typically the time that they use for their lunch bunches and to be able to meet with individual students and such. So we put them on call. So if they're not doing that, they could help us out. But again, it's difficult to schedule them full time into any of those blocks for that reason. And then the other individuals were the related service providers, such as OT and speech, and their schedules are now completely full during those times. They are available maybe on a Tuesday or on a Thursday, but they're not consistent throughout the week. So those are the constraints that we have into filling the duties for lunch.
Okay, I just felt the timing was a little interesting. All right, Ms. Downing.
Yeah, I think a couple of things that concern me about some things you said, John, Mr. Johnson, is the complication that this could pose with paras, the fact that they would be eating lunch, or at 10 o'clock and not having another break till late in the afternoon, which, from a school committee lens, could be another potential contract conflict we would have to deal with, which I would imagine it went into part of your decision in making, yet another factor, right, that went into making the decisions you've made. I'd say the other thing that I read in your notes that I thought was concerning is taking the paras away from the academic and SPED support. Can you say a little bit more about that? The time away from that, shifting these kinds of things. Again, we're getting into procedure, but shifting things could cause.
Sure. So when, in traditional years, when paras are not doing duties, then they're in the classrooms and they're supporting our special education students based on, the grids, the service delivery grids and who needs to provide those services. They're also just providing extra academic support to the classrooms for struggling students. So they might be able to take a group of students that we've identified all struggling in a common area and then work with them and such. So they do a lot of work in collaboration with the teachers, both on the special education side and just the regular general ed side, in supporting all of those students. So when we now take them and utilize them for about a 2-hour and 20-minute period to cover all of our lunches, they're no longer available to be in those rooms.
Okay, thanks. So I think it's just helpful for us to see why some of these decisions were made. Again, whether they're right or wrong, but I think we're getting a window into some of the collective thinking about these decisions.
And if I might be able to add, the paras have spoken to me about how much they want to be in the rooms. They want to work with our children. They want to support our children and our students. And that's where they get their joy in their day and when they come to work, because that's what they like to do. And of course, they're happy to do the duties and to support the systems that we have in place. But when I meet with them regularly and when they're talking about, the exposure and how many duties they have in a day this year, it comes up very frequently that they want to help kids. They want to be with kids. And, that goes into some of my decision making and how I can try to, limit the duties and limit the exposure for those individuals so they can support our classrooms and our students.
Thanks. All right. Any other comments? I know really what the point of this discussion is to take a vote, right, on the proposed policy revisions. So last comments now, Sarah.
So regarding the policy, I'll just jump right in there. With the revisions that I had, or the suggestions that I had made, I think, hearing what Andy had said, that asking for 1 per hour should be removed on that bullet point. So I don't know if you want to note that. I don't know if anybody wants to discuss that or disagrees with removing that particular portion of it, because it was my understanding that Andy felt that could be a problem with the MOA. So if we remove that, that should alleviate any issues with the teachers union. But other than that, with those other bullet points, and I went over this MOA dozens of times, I can't see that my recommendations would put a detriment effect on this contract. I don't see how teachers could grieve anything on that's on this policy. I just don't see it. Does any other board members, see anything there reading the MOA and seeing the recommendations that I made? Do you see a conflict anywhere?
I see less of a concern, Sarah, just as we were advised from legal with those last two bullets. At the same time, as Ron pointed out, even with those 2 bullets in there, that doesn't necessarily dictate where the kids are going to be ending up having lunch or break, because again, that's going to be determined based on all of these factors we've been talking about and what the school can do in terms of its staff capacity, its staff comfort level, room size, all of that. So I don't see how, I still don't think it's going to dictate anything if that's what you're the intention is to dictate that procedure of eating in the classroom.
Well, definitely the mask breaks in the classroom. I am definitely for that. I think it would
But you're
alleviate.
suggesting removing that bullet.
No, the last part of it, at least every hour, because that's what he had said would be a problem. So if you can just put during mask breaks in classrooms, because right now it just says during mask breaks. And I specifically put in classrooms. Do you see that there?
So what
I
you're concerned
personally
about
don't
is the
see-
timing?
I don't see how that changes the current policy, to be honest, because the current policy says during mask breaks. If we're saying that we're going to let the teachers give kids mask breaks in the classroom, they can do it under either proposal.
No, they can't. No, they can't be. Well, the thing is, if we write a policy that says during mask breaks in classrooms, then that would give the teachers both the opportunity to have them in the classroom.
If the administration says that they're going to support mask breaks in the classroom, it doesn't mandate it.
No. If the policy is written in the classrooms, operations has to change. And the policy.
I just want to remind you, Sarah, that anything that involves adult safety has to be impact bargained.
Right, and it doesn't, because the kids are over they're 6 feet apart, right, in the classrooms. They're 6 feet apart, and that's what the MOA says for the teachers, 6 feet apart. And they are allowed to take off their masks if they are near an individual that is at least 6 feet apart. So we are coinciding exactly what the MOA says, what DESE says, and what the CDC says.
And Andy said, our legal counsel said, you also have to go with the intention of what the teachers thought how they interpret that MOA. And right now, I can tell you that the teachers are comfortable with the masks on in the classrooms.
But again, that was not written in the MOA.
Right.
Even between the lines, students weren't talked about at all in that MOA.
It's for adults. MOA is for the
The
adults.
MOA is not.
Right, exactly. So, and this is for students.
Mhm.
So this is what we're putting for students, correct?
But it's a conflict between the adult MOA
How is it a conflict?
because you have to impact bargain anything that involves staff safety. So now, let's just hypothetically say that the kids can now take their masks off in class.
Mm-hmm.
Adults have been told since they've been in school, and it's been working, but adults have been told that they can be in the classrooms. Now, if all the kids take their masks off, I can actually see the adults being uncomfortable because now all the masks are off. They're in a closer proximity versus going outside, taking the masks off. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, but again, we're trying to do what the CDC and what DESE recommends, right?
DESE recommends whenever possible to go outside in a larger
Right.
area.
But they also recommend that you can do it in a classroom as long as a window is open within 6 feet apart. I want to reiterate that to everyone and whoever's listening here that I am not suggesting doing anything that the CDC or DESE is recommending. And I'm still, Paula, I'm sorry, I still don't understand how this could affect teachers and how they would feel uncomfortable because again, they're 6 feet apart. And if the kids take the mask breaks, and I'm not talking about all day, I'm talking about like 3 to 5 minutes, a 5-minute mask break, whatever they decide.
And I can tell you that one of the concerns, because the CDC just came out with what the definition of close contact is, it's a cumulative 15-minute period within 6 feet.
Right.
So let's just say they have a 5-minute mask break.
Right, a quick
Then they have
break.
another 5-minute and it equals 15 minutes. Now you've got exposure. I think people are just very nervous about this.
Does anybody have anything? Craig, anybody?
Yeah, Craig, please, if you'd
just-
like to share.
I'm obviously not on the policy subcommittee, and it seems like that there's a difference between policy and procedure and implementation. I don't know where that line is, but as a parent and a school committee member, I look at what CDC and what DESE recommendations are, and I think that's something that we should stick to and follow. I know we're not doctors, but those are guidelines that are set out by doctors that we should follow.
And as a school
We are
committee member-
following those guidelines though,
Right,
Craig.
but what I'm saying is we're setting a broad policy. You have other districts that have that language in place. So when people say it allows us to pivot and and make changes when we need to, well, they're gonna have to do it as well anyway.
But have
When
you
the
looked at the
situations
data
change,
for the
so
number
we're not backing
of positive
ourselves into
cases in other
anything.
districts?
What's that?
Have you seen the data for positive cases in other districts compared to
I have
Acushnet?
not.
I do
I
know
have
that the Board of Health says Acushnet is in very, very good shape as far as our positivity in schools. There is nothing. He said in other districts close by, the positivity rate with children is higher.
Right.
Well, I
Based
just
on
want to
what-
point out, though, I mean, we did receive, Craig, you had requested information from other districts, which we received. I reviewed that. And as you can see, everybody's doing things a little differently based on their unique needs in their district, following DESE. We are doing that same thing. We are following those guidelines, but we're doing it in a way that takes into account, again, the various factors at play in our unique district. So we can't follow necessarily what the other districts are doing because we have the stakeholders in our district who collectively came up with the approach that we are currently doing. Now, whether it's right or wrong, again, we can shift that. But I just don't, I think this is a matter of,
And this is one thing I was reading, the lunch schedule policy or the lunch schedule that you currently have in place. And it says students will select and walk by through the serving area and get their lunches. And if you look at the CDC website, it says avoid offering any self-serve food, drink options such as hot, cold, food bars, salad, condiment bars, drink stations. Serve individual plates and prepackaged meals instead of, grab your own food. So,
I think that's what we are
I
doing.
mean, is that opening? What's that?
We are doing that.
It's all prepackaged?
Yes. It's a one
Okay.
meal. We used to have, prior to COVID, we used to have, I know Mrs. Flynn can probably speak to this, but we used to have areas where they could get different drinks and different things that they could self-select. We don't have that anymore since last year.
I think, I'm sorry, Craig, were you done?
Yep, go ahead.
I think I agree. I think everybody makes great points. I'm still unsure, Dr. Bailey, what your thoughts are on it. Like, so for example, I said, my top priority in terms of safety concern is those mass breaks, the snack breaks, whatever you want to call them, especially on the inclement weather days. So is there a way that we, so I'm unsure if your concern is primarily like, so doing it another way is substantially more like unsafe, or you're concerned about the MOA, or both? Like, I'm not sure.
I think there's many factors. Everybody kind of has their own lens and their own opinion on this. And we have many, many different stakeholders who work in the buildings, many families to speak to. But I would be very open, if that is your top priority. My preference would be to keep the policy broad so that what the district doesn't get boxed into something that we actually can't do. But then to have further discussion, like, if this is such an important issue, which it clearly is, maybe we have a subcommittee a separate subcommittee where we invite some teachers, some parents, even students, on the issue. And this way, we can have those discussions and vet it out more and see, like, if the committee decides something, okay, that's the what, and now we have to decide the how. How are we going to do that? So it's a little bit more, instead of putting a policy in place that we can't follow, we vet it out a little bit more. That's my opinion, but I understand where you're coming from, and I agree with what Ron had said. I don't necessarily personally think one way could be safer or over the other. I think we're just all doing our best to keep our kids safe. And what I will say right now is the data is showing we're doing okay, knock on wood. We don't want to, go down a different road, but I'm so happy when I see the children and the staff with the things they're doing it's just amazing to watch how people have really stepped up. And it's become like no big deal in the schools with the kids. But I hear what you're saying, and if that's something that is really important, I don't have an issue with sitting down with a group of stakeholders, yourself included, and kind of figuring it out if that's the route we want to go in.
I just think that one way to, would be to give the teachers discretion. I mean, I think so many people have confidence in the teachers to make the right decision based on their class and, you know, the people that they have in front of them. And then also, you know, just, I don't know, so you mentioned some teachers might feel differently about it. And by giving them discretion, well, then it would give them options, right? And you know, outside's still available. It's really just those, you know, rainy, like nasty days that we're gonna have. We're gonna have plenty of those, and so, or just like super cold or whatever it is, you know, and just give them discretion on it. Then you know, the concern kind of goes away from an MOA standpoint, right?
It does for the teachers. Yep, it goes away for the teachers, but you have to keep in mind, we have many adults that are going into those classrooms. And again, they all have different opinions on walking into classrooms where children may not have the masks on. So somebody might be perfectly comfortable with it. They would have no problem, but it might have another adult who says, I don't want to go in that classroom, and I don't think that's fair. Everybody's got to do their job, right? And, you know,
I
do
mean,
the work.
we're all leaving the house every day too, you know,
No.
so I mean,
Yeah,
Can I
it is what it is.
yeah.
Can I just interject? I mean, Paula, we're not saying that these paras are going to, we're talking about a 3 to 5 minute break here for our kids.
Mhm.
So I'm sure if a para was about to walk in and saw that the kids didn't have their masks on, that she or he could wait a couple of minutes until they were done to put their masks back on to come into the classroom. So I don't think that's a problem. That shouldn't be a problem with teachers. It really, I mean, if we're all using common sense, and if you don't feel comfortable with, you know, 10 kids or 5 kids having masks that are off, then you just wouldn't go in there at that time. Again, we're not talking about 15 minutes. We're not talking about a half an hour. We're talking just a quick little break to give the kids a break, you know, from wearing that mask.
And I hear all of you, but I still want to just keep saying, why does that warrant a change in the policy?
Because for me, I think if we don't have it in the policy, then it, obviously we know, well, actually Paula just changed and just suggested that maybe we can talk about other things. But prior to this, you know, it really wasn't a discussion for the school committee members to have a say in anything. The only way we were really having a say in this, it was through the policy, because at least I have personally said my feelings for the past 3 or 4 meetings, and it wasn't going to change. Operations was not going to change. This is what it was. So I felt personally that the only way to put my feelings and my strong feelings for our kids, for our students, to make sure that they're safe, to make sure if somebody has COVID that they find the tracing as quickly as possible and find out who they were near. And also learning. That is a big thing that we need to think about. And with the kids leaving the classrooms, you know, twice a day or 4 times a day, getting them ready with coats and mittens and everything when the winter months come, you know, that's going to be time on learning, and they're only there for 2 days. So for me, and I've talked to other people in other districts, Dartmouth, Fairhaven, I hadn't talked to anybody in New Bedford, but Dartmouth and Fairhaven are doing it, and they feel like it's working, and their teachers are able to teach as the kids are taking their break, and it's silent. They're not talking, they're not doing anything. You know, they're taking their sips of water, they're lifting their mask up, taking a sip of water, but the teaching is still going, which as a school committee member and a parent, I feel is very, very important. So again, it's those 3 reasons that
I agree. And I think the better approach, Sarah, is to do this through a multi-stakeholder conversation where we are continuing to evaluate and to
is
learn
it going to be heard
and
though?
to adjust,
but-
and not to use the power of policy to do that, because the optics, frankly, are bad. We already know will not bode well for the culture that's being created in our community. So why in our district? So why even go there when we can do this through collective conversation?
But can we?
We're hearing from our district leader that we can.
today.
You haven't asked Sarah before. Mr. Teves just asked me tonight about getting together and having that discussion.
Okay.
Well, I think you suggested it, yeah.
I'm sorry?
I think you suggested it. But I would admit that I think tonight was the first time that I admitted my frustration, and I feel like I've said it over and over and over again, my concerns about the safety, and nothing's really been addressed. So, but and then you suggested, I think Ms. Downing suggested stakeholders. So, no, I think that's fine. But I'm listening to really Sarah on it, Ron on it. I mean, they're the subcommittee. So.
And I'll just say, John, I totally agree when you talk about introducing discretion. And I think that was one of the first conversations that the sub-policy committee had was, hey, again, my opinion is clear. I just think we should keep some of this out of policy. It doesn't mean I don't think that we should explore what's the right alternative here. And I think having a break in the classroom, I see no problem with that. Again, and we could talk about putting it in the policy. I just would say, what does discretion look like in a policy, and do we need it? But I think, to me, in my opinion, the much better approach here is let's hear from some other important stakeholders here besides this committee, right? Because we're all trying to represent our constituents and our personal views. But I think we need to also hear from our stakeholders whether they have similar concerns, where their concerns lie. And to me, that's a better way to get to an end result than unilaterally making that change, and from a policy perspective. But,
yeah, Ron, my point of view, and not to go too deep into this, but I mean, I'm here on this committee because of the kids, and I've been here a short time, and there's been almost the entire time I've been here, we've been talking about adults. And so I'm trying to, advocate for the kids here, because they're the ones this is impacting. My voice of concern on all this stuff is I don't want to say I could care less about, what the teachers think, but I could. I mean, this is about the kids. I mean, this is.
Well, every single person on this committee, John, we're all parents. So I think our number one concern, I mean, I don't want to speak on all of your behalf, but is the kid, our children. And
right. And I've been on this committee short time, Ms. Downing, and it's like, when do we get to talk about the kids and do something good for the kids here? We my entire time here so far has been about adults, and that's kind of the deal, I guess.
Yeah.
I hear you.
So John, I just to put it out there, I joined this committee probably much for the same reason that you did, was to focus on the kids. And I totally agree that the discussion's been about adults and policy, but I think I didn't make the point strongly enough earlier when I said, one of my concerns about changing this procedure through policy is it's a disruption, and ultimately it can be a disruption to our kids.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think so. I'll disagree to that regarding this, because like I said, my recommendations of what I see here is for the students. And if it's in policy, then all teachers need to follow it. So if you have teachers that are skittish and don't feel comfortable being in the same room with a child that doesn't have a mask on for 3 to 5 minutes, then it would be up to them to find somebody to take their place, or they stand out in the hallway. Again, with policy, it just makes sure that kids are protected throughout both of our schools. Because again, if we put it to the teacher's discretion, you might have some teachers that don't want to give any breaks, or some teachers that give multiple breaks. And I don't think that's fair to students. And again, that's why I was thinking that we should do it through a policy. So.
Okay, so we should take a vote. I think we've discussed this.
I think
we need to get here.
I would like to change that.
Okay.
So we got to get clarification on what we're voting on, because there's
Right.
a lot of changes that have taken place since this originally started to where we're at now.
So
Jen,
what
I
we
know,
would be
I know you
voting-
say that you'd like to, sorry.
Oh, sorry, go ahead,
ahead.
Greg, sorry.
No, I know you say that you'd like to keep the policy broad so administration can make that decision whether they should or shouldn't do it. But I think that, by putting it into a policy to have a mask break or a water break, you're not leaving it to the discretion, and it's got to be followed either way. So whether a teacher wants to do it or not do it, or having a general policy, you don't know if it's going to be followed or not. If it's in there, it has to be followed.
Well, I mean, the way that the policy is written doesn't say that the kids aren't having mask breaks.
Right, but they're not having the breaks in the frequency that we're looking for them to have now because it's not stated in the policy. Do you know what I mean?
Fair enough. Yeah.
Correct. I don't think we were able to do that. I don't think we could put a number amount. That's the one thing that Andy did say that could be an issue with the contract of the teachers. But again,
I understand that.
okay.
Yes. No, I'm just saying by just taking a 3 to 5 minute mask break or having a sip of water. I know my kids, they're going to school and they're not drinking water all day because they don't want to be looked at, getting up, walking across the room, going outside, take a sip of water and come back. They just don't want to be, stared at and looked at like, all right, there they go again, getting a drink of water. So I think just by being discreet about it, taking a sip, I don't see any harm in that.
Okay,
we
so
do it at our
I want to
meetings.
get clear about what I'm just looking. I've got your revision, Sarah, pulled up on my screen. So there's the first bullet that says during mass breaks in classrooms at least every hour.
Remove
That
the
was-
at least every hour.
Which was the bullet that Andy advised us to take out.
No, he advised at least every hour was not acceptable or might cause a problem. Does anybody remember that?
I have in my notes, first bullet of concern per legal.
But why was it a
Others not.
concern?
Well, because mask
we're doing
breaks in
mask
the
breaks.
classrooms.
No, we're doing in mask breaks, but in classrooms, he said was going to be, I don't remember that honestly. So if somebody else remembers.
Well,
You
the
did
reason
say
why
every
that could be a concern is because by saying in the classroom is because the current protocol in the school is that they're not being done in the classroom, and that seems to be aligned with the comfort level of everyone involved. And so that's where he thought if there's an area of concern where we could potentially ruffle some feathers. That's my recollection. And so the second two bullets, while eating or drinking in the classroom and other designated areas with individual classes, he didn't think that would be as much of a concern because, again, that's pretty broad because it's saying we could be eating in the classrooms, we could be eating outside the classroom. Again, up to the interpretation and what can be done by the teaching staff, the administrators, and so forth. Right, it's the procedural aspect of it. And then the third bullet during physical education classrooms, which I don't think. So I think my recollection was it was the first bullet.
Yes, and I think it was the unfair labor practice could be filed on that first bullet because there was a change in the working conditions where the break was every hour.
That's how I remembered it was the every hour because that would change working conditions because they would have to stop and do whatever they were doing and give a mask break. In the classrooms, I didn't think that was a problem and the reason why I say that with a little bit of confidence is because other districts are doing it. I read Dartmouth's MOA with the teachers and it was sort of similar to ours and it hasn't been an issue there. So
But it's a different
again,
school district. You can't say that.
what I'm saying is I'm comparing
stakeholders.
contracts. So Jen, I'm just saying that reading the MOA for the teachers of Acushnet, reading the MOA for Dartmouth, and then comparing the policies, they were similar. There wasn't any red flags that I saw that would cause an issue saying in the classrooms. But again, I mean, we can just put it to a vote if, however way you want to do it.
Well, I mean, okay.
I think it just needs to be worded that it's like it's allowed right? So having a mask break is in the classroom is allowed, but it's also allowed at these other designated areas, no?
Okay, yeah, I mean, that's fine with me. I mean, if
Like
that's all
teacher
I got.
discretion. But by the way, outside is still an option, and they're probably gonna use
Right.
that a lot of times,
Right.
you know? Right? So, I'm just
However
saying-
way everybody wants to word it is fine. My point is I think teachers should be able to give their kids breaks in the classroom while they're trying to teach them.
And Paula, I mean, I guess what you've been telling me and what folks have been saying to me is that that could make some teachers uncomfortable, right? Taking the breaks in the classroom, that they feel more comfortable having that done outside of the classroom,
So we're gonna penalize.
even though it's a
10 kids?
logistical
I mean,
nightmare. No, but we need teachers to come to school. I mean, that is the reality. We do
Right,
need
but they
teachers to
could
feel
get,
safe.
they could step outside or something. There are other alternatives that teachers could do, you know, to give their
Sure.
kids a break. I mean,
Again, I just don't want to see us in a situation where there could be changes done on a building level through conversation instead of doing something at the policy level that could just cause a lot of chaos we don't need right now in this district.
All I will say and comment on that is the ATA president made it very clear to me, and she used the word safety. She said if there's anything to do with safety, that a ULP will be filed on behalf of the teachers and the staff, actually.
and the only way they would be able to do that is if we violated CDC or DESE guidelines, which we would not be doing.
Well, remember, legal told us because we already have an MOA in place, that's.
And it doesn't violate that either.
Well, I think that's
Legal
up to
advised us that the
discretion.
first bullet as written could potentially, if interpreted in that way.
Dr. Bailey, in your conversation with the ATA, I know they came to the last meeting, but I don't know if there have been any conversations outside of that where we feel like if the end game in all of this was that kids can take a mass break in the classroom, are they going to feel like that is an unsafe situation? Do we have I mean, I think we do, but I just want to test that and make sure that I'm clear that we think that that alone is going to cause them to have an issue.
According to the ATA president who represents the ATA, yes.
So I just want to make it clear that the ATA, our teachers in both schools, right, the whole district, would fight the school committee as a sovereign body to not allow our kids to take 3 to 5 minute mass breaks in the classroom. I just want to, okay.
I don't understand what that means. I'm just asking the question if we think they're going to have an issue. I don't know what that meant, but.
Okay, so what we need to decide if we're going to vote on the MASC policy first and foremost. And I think we decided that we are going to vote to align with all of our policies, bring the MASC recommended policy. The question at hand here is, are we going to adopt the revisions that were proposed by Ms. Gomes? And we've got them in front of us. Do we want to bring this to a motion with making any further revisions or as currently written? Yes, Sarah.
I don't want to do it as currently written because
Okay.
I know that at least every hour is going to be a problem. Can I recommend maybe doing the face coverings that Mass has given us, the original version, minus our students in grade 1 and below, and just see if that passes? The original? You want to start there first?
Can you just copy the CDC language on that?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. What do
Can
you
you
mean?
just copy what the CDC says, as long as they can take mass breaks, as long as they're 6 feet apart?
That is in the general MASC policy. They consulted with DPH, CDC. The one thing I do want to just, going back to what Mrs. Gomes just said, to start there. Also, what I did was I added, there's a back page on that original, and it talks about, the biggest thing is no gators. You know, we have So most districts, from my understanding in the state, have adopted that and added that to the MASC policy. So I just want to make sure that that's included in both, or whichever way you guys decide to go, because it's working well for us.
Did we have the, in our packet, oh, we do. I was gonna say, do we have the original MASC policy? I just wanted to reference it to
I don't
compare.
think it was there.
It's
Yeah,
in
it
there.
says language proposed by district
Yeah.
written on the top.
Yes,
That's what
it
it is.
is, right. I know, I thought it was not there either, but I did find it. I just wanted to look at that. So Craig, so currently in that section, what it says is additionally, this is the original language. Additionally, face masks or face coverings will not be required when appropriate social distancing is enforced, and there are 4 bullets: during mask breaks, while eating or drinking, during physical education classes, and while outside. So that's the MASC policy as written.
Sarah, are you proposing to go with a vote on the original one and then possibly update that? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, almost. I think we should vote on the original policy, except with your changes that you had made on the cross out. And
Yep.
if that doesn't pass, then maybe it would be a good idea for some of us to meet with your stakeholders and maybe discuss some other ways. I mean, I would love to talk to the ATA and other teachers and parents to see how they feel to help us get a policy. But again, that's up to the committee.
Can I ask a question? Dr. Bailey, if we voted on the district's proposed policy, just to get a policy in place, okay? And then we work going forward, starting immediately on trying to get some of our concerns heard and adjusted through procedure somehow. And try that path in just getting some changes and some action. And if we don't, as a committee, see those changes and actions happening, would it be appropriate for us to make revisions to the mask policy?
Yes, you can, as a committee, anytime that you want to make revisions or proposals, all you have to do is, like what we're doing today, is do it through a meeting and a vote, and it's changed.
So if we get a mask policy in place, just to get it in place, and then start hearing some of the concerns that I think, for the most part, we're in general consensus on some of these things, so that, like, right? So if we started working on some of that stuff and we just weren't happy with the progress, then we could reopen that policy.
Anytime.
Is that and Sarah and Ron, is that appropriate?
100%, 100% on board with that approach. I think, and again, this goes back to a conversation at the last committee meeting, is that where any of this lands is, like, I feel like we got to be having these conversations to have plan Bs and contingencies to adjust. And so I'm totally on board with that.
Ms. Gomes?
Yes. Yep. No, I would be willing to do that.
Is it the end result is the actions, the procedures to make things better for the kids and safer, right? And for everybody.
That is the only goal and the only reason why I do anything that I do in this town.
So and again, I just want to make sure
I'm
that,
also quite comfortable with that approach. It makes a lot of sense to me.
so in your packets, you had the language proposed by the district, but keeping in mind that also included the additional information that would, just so everyone's clear on what we're following. It's similar language, but I just wanted to include the fact that the only thing we really added was the pre-K to 8 wearing of the face coverings, as well as no gaiters. You know, to have a full face mask with no valves, nothing like that, just to cover the nose and the mouth. So that, to me, should be part of it, you know, but I would want it in the motion if you could.
Okay. So do I have to do any kind of motion taking the proposed language off now, or do we just proceed with the MASC as written, noting these changes?
So if somebody makes a motion with that specifically, then you can go right into any second discussion and a vote.
Okay.
So what is this gonna look like? We're gonna take this to a stakeholder meeting. We're gonna figure out what exactly everybody wants, and then it's gonna come back to the full committee, and then we vote on changes? Or is that going back to the subcommittee?
No, I think what we're,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was just clarifying. I think what we're saying, Craig, is that we're going to essentially agree to adopt a general policy as written by MASC, but that we're going to have a conversation about procedures and
Right.
and start in it and try to find some consensus around safe procedures moving forward with other input beyond this committee. And if we start to see action in a direction where we all feel positive about, then there's really no need to update the policy unless there's a need to. If actions aren't being taken, then we would revisit the policy. Does that make sense? Did I say that right?
To your question, Mr. Sumner, it could go either way. It could either go back to this policy subcommittee if that's what the committee chooses, or it could go back to the whole committee, reported on by the representation of who's on that
Well, I think it
subcommittee.
should come back to the full committee at some point, because
Of
at
course.
the end of the day, it could be running smoothly in somebody's eyes, but in somebody else's eyes, it might not be.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know how what it's gonna look like, but is there gonna be one person on this subcommittee?
I think it's up to the committee on how they want to structure that. I
Yeah.
think it should, the thing is, it should be two, because if it's three, then we have a quorum and it becomes like a school committee meeting, right?
Right.
Well,
I'm just afraid that at the full committee level, we have an idea right now on what we're looking for as a whole. This is going to go to a subcommittee level, and then it's just going to get lost in the shuffle. And we're not going to get back to today where are we going to vote on a change, or are the changes going to actually happen?
So I think it would be interesting for the committee to hear from stakeholders. I guess what I don't want to have happen, I mean, I'm going to do whatever the committee votes on, right? What I do not want to have happen is if there is a vote taken and adults, somebody brought it up tonight, no matter what we're talking, adults or kids, it does trickle down and everything impacts our children. If people start calling in, if people start filing a ULP, that is going to impact the way the kids get their education. There will be a disruption. So I personally would recommend having the conversation in a very comfortable way so that you can hear from teachers, from paras, all the people who it impacts.
Is there a way to set up maybe a handful of meetings with some of the stakeholders where different members of this committee can participate so that we don't have the whole committee in one group, but
Yeah.
all of the members have an opportunity to participate in some of those
I
conversations?
think that's a great idea. I'm not sure what the committee thinks, but I think
like
we
that
get
approach.
everybody involved. And
Yeah.
maybe, again, you can structure it how you want. Maybe you meet with the paras, maybe you meet with the teachers, or maybe it's more of a representation. A couple of teachers from the middle school, a few teachers from the elementary school, like there's multiple ways of doing this. Some upper grade teachers, some lower grade teachers, like I think we just have to figure out what we want that group to look like and it's managed.
Craig, will that work for you in terms of, I want everybody on this committee to
No,
feel.
yeah, I'm fine. And I mean, I just don't, we're at a situation right now where the whole committee has different feelings on this stuff. And what's going to happen is we're going to adopt this policy, and then this is going to go by the wayside, and then things may change, they may not change. We don't know. I just want to make sure that we get back to the spot we're in at some point to say, are we good with what's going on, or are we not good with what's going on?
Yeah, and I think it's high visibility, at least for us, and let's, as a committee, commit to trying to drive an end game. And I actually agree with something John said earlier, which was, I think when it comes down to it, maybe we're all closer aligned on the end game here than we might think. And it's a matter of, again, semantics, right? Of whether it's policy or implementation. But I think it would be great if we all could get put together a few different groups so we could all have a chance to hear from some of those very group of stakeholders, and we can all come back having heard, right? And so we're not hearing it secondhand, right? We've all participated, we've all heard some of the flavor from those people, and we can come to a resolution that works for everybody, hopefully, and ultimately is the best solution for the kids.
May I suggest that the policy subcommittee meet immediately, right away, to come up with what that's going to look like. So that means that the committee members can certainly let people know, but then we can kind of map out what that's going to look like. Ron just had the idea of having several different meetings so that different committee members rotate in, but we have to organize it, right? So I'm wondering if the policy subcommittee would want to do that with me, so that, and then we can just, email it to people, vet it out, and then, does that sound
Do
okay?
you want to, we have time at 7:30, don't we? Didn't we put place, do you want to do it right now after this meeting?
We have an
We have
executive
executive
session,
committee.
the executive session, and then we have to come back in and take a vote. I will tell you that the executive session will be very brief. It is not lengthy at all.
Ms. Hood, and, excuse me, Ms. Gomes, Mr. Hood, can I make a suggestion?
Please.
This town has plenty of who I would consider ultimate stakeholders. These are parents who are Acushnet residents, who are also teachers. So we have teachers, Acushnet resident, and parents with kids in school.
Yeah.
So I think those would be the first stop in terms of putting these think tanks together.
We can
Yeah,
definitely
we want
discuss that.
representation from everybody, so everybody feels they're a part of it. So do
Okay.
you want to do that tonight after the vote is taken, devise that versus doing a separate policy meeting?
Sarah, whatever works.
I'm fine with that, Ron.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Okay, so going back to the policy, we decided as a committee, we're going to vote on the MASC policy language as written with there are a couple of changes that the district recommended. Exempt, do I have to read those in the motion? Dr.
The only
Bailey?
change is that all children pre-K to 8 wear face coverings, whereas the original MASC said exempted from this policy are students in grade 1 and below. So that is in the second paragraph. There's a strike through on that sentence. But other than that, we didn't make any changes except, again, adding that little bit of language in the end about, the specific with the masks.
Okay. All right, so is it okay for me to move forward with a vote?
You need a motion.
Okay, so if I could request a motion, please, to approve the MASC policy as written with the two changes noted that were recommended by the district with regard to pre-K through 8 face coverings, as well as the types of face coverings.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor?
I'm gonna do a roll call,
Oh.
Jen.
Oh, okay, we'll do a roll call. Over to you, Ms. Benavides.
Thank you, Jen. Mrs. Gomes,
Yes.
Mr. Sumner,
Yes.
Mr. Teves,
Yes.
Mr. Hood,
Yes.
and Mrs. Downing.
Yes,
Thank you.
great, thank you. All right, Great. Okay, moving on in our agenda, we do have delegation. So we are going to welcome comments. This is the public comment segment of the meeting. We'll welcome them now. You can please forward all your comments to Mrs. Benavides at kellybenavides@acushnetschools.us. I don't know if you've received any comments yet. No?
Nothing yet.
Okay. And how much time do we want to allow that, Dr. Bailey or Mrs.
Well,
Benavides?
I think perhaps while we're discussing the process of what we just talked about, it would give people time
Okay.
to email in.
Yeah.
And I would maybe say put a time limit on, because I think we already have the ideas of how we want to perhaps go about this.
Yes. Yes. I do want to allow those some time for
Yeah.
folks to at least get their comments
Yes.
emailed and in. So why don't we move on to point 5 on our agenda, which is new business. And I'll hand that over to you, Dr. Bailey. Oh,
Yep.
nothing right now, it looks like, on the agenda.
Yeah, the only thing I'm going to mention is that when we do go into executive session, we will be discussing the MOA that you've received. And then the idea is to come back into the session and take a vote. There is going to be an email that you will receive tomorrow regarding an arbitration settlement. I just wanted to let you know that I will bring that up in executive session, but we're not going to discuss it. I'm just going to let you know that it's coming tomorrow. The idea of it is both the MOA and the arbitration settlement need to be, we need signatures. So I'm hoping that starting tomorrow, folks can come in and sign both of those things if, everyone's in agreement.
Okay, great.
That's all I have.
Communication and information, do you want to say anything there?
No, those are just letters that have gone home. Like I said, we've dialed back a bit starting this week because what we have been doing has been working. Families have been super appreciative and so have the students, but we feel like we're in a good place right now. So I don't think, again, I hope that people don't see as many letters going out to families at this point because we feel like we've got the data to prove that this transmission is not happening in our schools, so.
Dr. Bailey, can you just elaborate on that a little bit, like the dialing back? Can you
Yeah.
specifics on that?
Sure. We've been working very closely with the town, the Board of Health, the fire chief. They have the means to do testing so that we've been doing a lot of testing and families have, quite frankly, I'm surprised, but they have really embraced it. And I believe, I don't want to speak for the chief or anybody, but they've spent a lot of money on these tests. But according to the Board of Health, the health agent, Joe Correa, has said that they've got their data to show that there's no spread happening in Acushnet Public Schools. So what we want to focus on now, so they don't run out of money and don't run out of tests, is when kids are positive, when there is an absolute need to have testing versus going above and beyond, which is what we've been doing because that's the guidance that we've been given and in discussions with our team meetings with the town. So I feel like we're in a good place right now, actually.
So there was the letter that went out on October 21st, the one that was addressing, I guess, saying the students would be allowed to return to school. They met the following conditions. They have a negative COVID test and they have not been identified as a close contact. Is that changed in any way?
I don't have it in front of me because we didn't have it for this meeting.
Oh, okay. So that was the one that I think Ms. Downing, that was the one that I emailed you about, and I Ms. Gomes got a call back from Mr. Correa. It took 4 days, but he did call me back because I had questions on that one because I was just there were a couple of concerns on that. The second line saying they have not been identified as a close contact. I was like, well, who's not a close contact? So everyone, who's not a non-close contact or whatever. So does that mean that language implied that we're testing the whole school? Then the second part of that was the recommended. So like, for example, I think the first one where I think it was an incident in maybe third grade, and then the entire grade got tested. So you're saying that we're not going to do that type of stuff anymore. Is that right?
It depends what the scenario is. And in that particular scenario, testing needed to be done because it was a possible adult transmission, if you will. And that was, I don't want to get into it too specifically, but that was strongly recommended at the time.
And for people, if it's recommended that they get a test, and they've also been identified as a non-close contact, what if the family decides that they're not going to get a test? What happens then?
They've been quarantining, but we honestly have not had an issue. To my knowledge, the families, I mean, if you look at the number of tests that we've been doing, and it's not really me, it's the town, right? People want to be tested. So our families have been extremely cooperative. They understand, they don't want to take the chance. I've talked to a few families on the phone. And I think what's really helping us is the fact that when kids are at home, they're still accessing their education and it counts as a day of school. So I think that helps.
So I guess my question was, so if we haven't had anybody that's pushed back on that and didn't want to get their kid tested?
I think we have maybe one or two kids. It's very few.
So
The majority of people have gotten tested.
And what happens in those incidents? Because I guess my concern on that one is if a recommendation turns into more of a requirement.
We can't require testing.
And so what do you do in that instance? They're welcome. I mean, they can come back to the school, correct?
If after they quarantine or show a negative result if they test.
But they're not
That's
a
the
close
recommendation
contact.
of the Board of Health.
But we're having them quarantine even though they're a non-close contact.
Well, no, they would have to be considered a close contact.
Okay.
I thought that's what my letter said, and like I said, I
No,
don't.
it doesn't. The letter says if you have not been identified as a close contact.
Well, all I can say is I don't have it in front of me, Mr. Teves, but
All right.
that letter went, it was vetted out with the Board of Health, because again, we wanted our messaging to be
Is it a
aligned.
typo?
I don't know, I'm gonna look at it.
Yeah, because it says you need to produce a negative COVID test and not be a close contact. So that's implying that we're requiring non-close contacts to produce a negative COVID result, or they're denied access to the school. And I guess that was my concern on it.
Yeah, I'm gonna take a look at that letter.
Because I just think that for some people, the anxiety exists in not knowing, and they would prefer to get tested. And then for other people, the anxiety could be the testing itself, right? And so, I think if they're a non-close contact, I would say, we'd want to leave that at their discretion, right? Especially since the way we were going, I was like, oh my God, some of these kids are going to be tested 3, 4, 5 times before Christmas if we keep doing it like this,
Well, the town is actually bringing in a new rapid test, which is a swab of saliva, and it's a 15-minute result. So it's definitely not as invasive as that nasal swab is. And it's, according to the chief, it's extremely reliable. Either you have it or you don't. And he states that should be coming to the town in a few weeks, which is good news. But I agree with you. Nobody wants kids to take multiple nose swab tests. It's uncomfortable. It doesn't hurt, but it is uncomfortable. And that's why I give our students and families so much credit, because they've been great about it as we've done this. And I just want to reiterate again, we've never been through this before, but we have collaborated so closely with the Board of Health, the fire chief, stakeholders. Everyone is doing their level best to make sure that our kids are safe and that we keep the virus and the spread out of our buildings. And so far, we've been successful with that. But I will take a look at that letter, Mr. Teves.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Great. Mrs. Benavides, any comments come through?
No, ma'am.
No? All righty. So we are now going to move into executive session to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares. So if I may make request a motion, please, for us to move into executive session.
So moved.
Second, was there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on that? Okay, all those in favor? Okay.
Aye.
Okay, and do we have a special link to come back in?
Yes, I sent you all the link, I believe yesterday.
Okay, great.
Dr. Bailey, I just want to make sure that this is an executive session I can participate in.
I believe it is. I think so. And when I present it, we can determine that, but I'm pretty sure you're fine to participate in it.
All right, I'll come in. If you need to kick me out, that's fine.
We'll kick you
Sorry.
out if we have to.
So I just want, Mr. Oliver, if you're still there, do we all just sign out and come back in?
Yes, just sign out and come back into using the same link.
Okay.
Okay,
We're all going to go now to Mrs. Benavides' link that she sent us for the executive session, and then we'll return to this link.
perfect.
Okay?
All right, thanks, everybody.
All right, see you in a minute. Are we all
Okay,
set, Mr.
everybody's
Oliver?
here now.
All set.
Okay. Welcome back, everybody. We are going to now take a vote on, hold on, I'm gonna get my agenda up.
Mrs. Downing, we need a motion to enter.
Motion to enter our session. May I please request that motion?
Make a motion.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 And Mrs. Downing, we did get a delegation.
Okay, let's go ahead and read that.
Okay. The delegation is from Michelle Gonzalez. And it states, my name is Michelle Gonzalez, parent of a 7th grader. I want to state my opinion that I agree with Sarah Gomes regarding how taking 5 minutes or less of a mask break at a children's desk seems totally reasonable per guidelines. It is unfortunate that all this lengthy discussion happening is due to being afraid about what the teachers are going to do and not what is best interest of our kids. Sincerely, Michelle Gonzalez.
Thank you. All right, we're gonna now conduct a vote on the MOA for, I don't have it written on the agenda, how to appropriately, is it nurse MOA?
Adding the lead nurse as written.
Lead- Thank you.
Mhm.
The lead nurse MOA as written.
So
May I
moved.
please request a motion of approval?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll take a
Right.
roll call. Mrs. Gomes,
Yes.
Mr. Sumner,
Yes.
Mr. Teves,
Oh,
Mr. Teves,
Abstain?
abstain, okay. Mr. Hood
Yes.
and Mrs. Downing.
yes. Okay, great, thank you. We have nothing else on our agenda, so we're gonna move into adjourn the meeting. Our next regular school committee meeting will be held remotely on Tuesday, November 10th at 5:30 in Zoom land.
Chair, not to prolong this meeting, but are we having a discussion on
Oh.
setting up the group?
Yes, thank you for
Okay.
that reminder.
Yep,
Do we
that's
want to
okay.
discuss that further before we log off? You're on mute, Sarah.
Is it just Ron and myself and Paula discussing this, or is this live? And I was
It's up to the
confused.
committee.
Do you want to sit here for this?
Should this go to subcommittee if we're gonna form a committee, like the policy subcommittee?
We can certainly do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm comfortable with the policy subcommittee coordinating, some of the logistics on this and just keeping us in the loop of how you want to proceed. I think the understanding was we're all going to get an opportunity to to connect with various stakeholders and hear input. So as long as we do proceed in that way, I'm comfortable with allowing the subcommittee to kind of coordinate logistics.
Whatever we find out, either Ron and I can discuss who's going to email you, Jen, just so you can get it to the rest of the committee. Is that how you want it to work, or do you want us to go through Paula? What would you like?
Oh, I think it's fine going through Paula.
Okay.
Either way. So Sarah and Ron, I'll schedule something with you. Obviously, I need to do a 48-hour notice on a meeting, but I'll try to schedule something as soon as possible. I'll run it by both of you first, just to make sure you can make it, and we'll be good.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
And sorry, so this meeting is for us just to get a game plan for the, oh, okay.
Is that okay?
I mean, yeah.
I-
Ron, do you want to just do it? I mean, Ron and myself, if we're together, then we have to do the whole 48-hour thing.
Yeah.
But if Ron, I don't know if you have time, or I can do it to talk to Paul and just come up with the groups and then so we don't have to wait the whole 48 hours and then do the whole meeting. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mr. Teves gave us a couple of recommendations in terms of stakeholders. So I think if we can identify folks from those groups who we think would be reasonable people to reach out to, who have the time, willingness, et cetera. And then I think we probably want to identify just some more groups or stakeholders that we think we need to engage through this process. But yeah, I think we could do it via email and then get it out or whatever, Sarah.
How about if people email their thoughts, I could coordinate it and put it all together and then blast it back out, or put a suggestion based on what I get from everybody, blast it back out by email. We just have to we have to be careful in how we reply. So it only would be, the response would be back to me, not to the whole committee.
Yeah, and if we could do that in the next, let's do 2 days, do you think that's sufficient for everybody? In 2 days, get all your recommendations, and then that way by maybe beginning of next week, we can get going on this. Is that okay?
Sure.
So would it be fair to say by the close of business on Thursday, I would have emails from everybody with their thoughts on this?
Yep.
Sure.
Specifically, what are you looking for? I'm just, I want to make
Ideas?
sure I'm getting the assignment right.
Yeah, so you gave some thoughts on stakeholders and then Ron gave a thought about, or somebody did, about rotating the committee members, like thoughts like that. I could pull that together and put together what I think is, but everybody would get it, and then get feedback from you, and we could start it if people were good with it.
Right.
This
So
way
for
everybody has
example-
input into the process.
So for example, John, I'm thinking, I would definitely, a suggestion would be a nurse, 3 parents, 4 teachers, and an administrator, something along like that, right, Paula? Is that what we're thinking?
That's one way of doing it, correct?
And
Just
Paula, can we, if we think we know people who fall into some of these buckets, especially parents, teachers, how do we go about identifying those people that we think could be good participants?
So what I always like to do is put it out to everyone, because to be fair, I just like to blast things out, and then we can figure out a fair way to be inclusive of, if Sarah says that she wants 2 parents, John says he wants a parent and a teacher who fall in that same role, we could look and say, okay, that person falls into that role, so we need them. You know what I mean? Because we don't know if people would be interested or not, but people may be interested. We could see what the interest is and then bring it back to the group and say, this is what we have. What does the committee want to do? And the other thing we could do is, again, this is another idea, we could do a Zoom meeting, just a separate meeting where people can talk about their ideas and their thoughts, so people are heard on this matter. I always like to be inclusive and,
No, I think that's great. Yeah. Yeah.
okay.
I agree. Okay.
So within 2 days, you would, each of you would send me an email with your thoughts on how to organize this. I'll put something together based on what you write. I'll send everything back out, and then we'll see how it rolls out from there.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay.
All
All right.
right. Do I have to redo our motion to adjourn, or?
Yeah, we never really,
Okay, so if I could request a motion to adjourn, please.
Make a motion.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion
I'm
for
sorry,
this
was
evening?
that you, John, that second?
Yeah,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, and seeing no further discussion, we are adjourned. Are all those in favor? Yes. Great. All right, thanks, everybody.